part 6, we looked at creating new genes. Why does there need to be new genetic information added as we grow the Darwinian tree of life? Well, simply because there's only two options. Number one, the genes to make a fish always existed in the bacteria and worms, so that the arisal of the fish kind doesn't demand new genes to come into existence. Or two, the genes to make a fish did not exist in bacteria, so somewhere along the line those genes needed to come into being. We do not have to believe that fish have to have more DNA nucleotide base pairs than worms or bacteria. We only have to accept the fact that fish have structures and behaviors that are coded for in genes that did not exist in worms or the bacteria. So fish have gills, fish have fins, fish have eyes. Those are created by the DNA information in their genome, which means the genes for gills must have come into being at some point. It doesn't make sense to say that the first bacteria on Earth somehow accidentally got the genes for every feature that any plant or animal would ever have. So somewhere between that bacteria and those fish, the genes for gills would have to come into being. Well, we don't think worms had gills either. And so somewhere perhaps between worms and fish, the gene for gills had to come into being. Evolution has to explain how that new gene came into being. And it needs that gene to come into being because you can't make a worm into a fish by taking genes away. You have to add the genes that create gills and fins and eyes and all the other things that make a fish distinct from a worm. Another topic the boys got talking about was natural selection. Can't natural selection produce amazing adaptations, as some have said? And the answer is no. But instead of taking my word for it, let's define natural selection according to the words of Charles Darwin himself. Quoting, individuals having any advantage, however slight, over others would have the best chance of surviving and procreating their kind. On the other hand, we may feel sure that any variation in the least degree injurious would be rigidly destroyed. This preservation of favorable individual differences and variations, and the destruction of those which are injurious, I have called natural selection, or survival of the fittest. Variations neither useful nor injurious would not be affected by natural selection. The words of Charles Truckee Darwin on Origin of Species, 4th chapter, 6th edition. Amen. What does it mean? Imagine a population of rubber ducks. You've got blue ones and yellow ones. They're the same species in the same population, but something in the environment gives the blue ones an advantage over the yellow ones. So Darwin says that natural selection is going to preserve beneficial variations and get rid of harmful variations. When it's preserving beneficial variations, is it creating those variations? No! It's preserving what's already there. You can't preserve something that isn't. So when Darwin says natural selection preserves beneficial variations, he's assuming that the variations already exist, which means natural selection is not the origin of species. And the thing is, he admits this in the rest of this page, which I quote in the chapter there. Origin of species means the species comes into being. Preservation of species is not the same thing as origin of species, which means that in Darwin's own words, natural selection cannot be the origin of species. Natural selection is just how nature, left to itself, preserves certain variations because they are beneficial and gets rid of harmful variations, which is really more of a stabilizing effect. It keeps the population consistent. If for some reason a variation popped into existence that was harmful, it would go away and the population would remain the same. Nothing changes. Natural selection is not a writer, it's an editor. It keeps things, it doesn't make things. In the next installment, the guys are going to look at why it is I say that these new genes have to cause an increase in not just physical complexity, but also behavior. So that'll be up tomorrow on creationsoapbox.wordpress.com. I hope you'll enjoy that. Thanks for letting me be your Rent-A-Friend.